about the past. If you ask my daddy, like that.
Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. And we are live. Good evening. Today is still Wednesday, May 26, 2021. I am your host, Evan George, and welcome to Bostopia Nightly News, my new side gig project. And we are still in soft launch. Everyone's going to forgive the technical difficulties. But in the news today, Nisa Savi George and John Santiago scored their endorsements, and John Santiago received an apology afterwards. The MBTA is increasing service, but still refusing to fully restore their cuts. There's a great dynamic involving how public transportation is sometimes disproportionately benefits whiter, wealthier residents, and we're going to get to that shortly. The massive private equity firm Blackstone has bought not most of Boston, but is our largest corporate landlord. And finally, Maura Healey still refuses to investigate campaign finance violations and said that the ones that were sent to her were unnecessary. And so if you are following on TikTok, I'm going to put you down there. And for the people watching at home, let's jump right into the first story, and I covered this on the podcast a little bit. I may have mentioned it during last night's episode. But the MBTA is planning to boost service on the red, orange, blue, green lines, as well as adding an additional 30 buses. And while this is fantastic news, these changes take into effect June 20th. However, they are still refusing to fully restore the cuts that were made a few months ago. Where I know I'm a broken record on this, the MBTA received over $1 billion from our federal government to maintain, restore, keep on going public transportation. And rather than using that money to actually continue, maintain public transportation, they decided to side pocket it and make cuts. And now that the state is trying to economically recover, they are now restoring about 90% of them, which is, again, part of a much larger strategy of slowly cutting away, trimming at the edges, public transportation in the state. But what the changes will look like is roughly the red and the blue line will be running at 5-minute intervals compared to roughly, they say 5.5. I've been on the red line. It's closer to 7 minutes intervals. Have been the status quo. And the orange line will be switching to 7 minutes as well. But the green line is the big story, and this is something I want to spend a little time on, and I know I mentioned it in the 60-second rundown. And just reading now from the top, reading from the Boston.com, MBTA finds the Green Line extension will disproportionately benefit richer, wider riders. And what this headline reminds me of is I'm a very open and public champion of the Free the T movement, which let's just give Michelle Wu some credit, even though, of course, she did not invent the concept of free public transportation. And when I was retweeting or messaging this out, I got quite a few people that were labeling myself and this policy as racist. saying that this program to give free public transportation is going to benefit more white people than people of color, and therefore that this universal program of free public transportation is inherently racist, and so am I for supporting it. There's a lot of reasons why that is a ridiculous and ill-informed argument, but staying with its premise, there are truths around public transportation, particularly in Massachusetts. However, this is a trend which you can find everywhere. So with this particular study that was done, just reading from it now, during a meeting Monday afternoon, the MBTA officials presented the results of an equity analysis, finding that the forthcoming Green Line service in Somerville and Medford will disproportionately benefit higher income white riders. And of course, what disproportionately benefit means is that as a grouping of the population, if wealthy white people in Somerville and Medford, let's say, make up 30% of the population there, it's probably depends on how you're defining wealthy, but they will 60% of the people riding it will be in that category. So disproportionate always means either much larger than your population size is or shorter. In this case, it's saying it's going to go the other way, larger, because they're disproportionately benefiting from it. Now, why this is generally the status quo and why I wanted just to talk about it a little bit is really two different phenomena. But the first is that whenever we have an area that has, we'll say, low-income residents, and there's a sincere effort to now, we need to get public transportation to that area, right? I support that. Who wouldn't support that? We need to build up these communities, make it so people who live there have easier access to their jobs, easier access to local restaurants, so on and so forth, right? However, the second you start planning for an increase in public transportation in a certain area, that is going to affect the property value of that area. Because now that area is now a little bit more desirable, a little bit more lucrative. And so before people like me even find out about these type of developments, people in the know generally get tipped off saying, oh, hey, they're planning a big Green Line extension in this neighborhood and that neighborhood. And then people start buying the property, which then adds to the speculation, which makes it even more expensive. And so the people who originally lived there, who these services were meant to support and help, end up getting displaced and gentrified out of the area. And then who fills those shoes? Whiter, wealthier residents. And so this Green Line extension has been in the work for decades. Let me see if I can just read parts of this now. Heffernan alluded Monday to the fact that particularly Somerville, which will see the percentage of residents within a half mile of a transit stop increase from 20% to 80%, has seen its old blue-collar reputation transformed by an influx of young professionals in new development in the years since state officials first committed to the long-delayed project in the 1990s. So since the 1990s, this project, this idea has been on the books, something they've been aspiring towards. And now, decades later, especially after the massive developments we've been having in Massachusetts, Somerville, Cambridge, Medford, the surrounding areas, this property value is, I mean, it doubled, the property value doubled from 2010 to 2020 in the Boston larger area. And so, of course, now the people who fill those shoes, who now get to benefit from those services, which took decades to take place, will be wealthier and whiter. Which is why you need to have very strong protections, very strong tenant protections. The key to most issues around displacement and gentrification, outside of the larger context of reappropriation, of redistribution, which absolutely needs to happen, is to have as strong of tenant protections as possible so that this doesn't happen, so people aren't being displaced, so that the people that live in those communities actually benefit from the investments of within those communities and don't just kick out and leave. And this is a constant thing that you hear, because you will hear whenever there's new development, people say, like, this is good for Boston, this is good for Dorchester. However, when some people say that, what they are referring to are, this is good for me and my friends because we're going to get to stay. This is bad for the other people because I don't consider you part of this area. So when we say this new development is good for Dorchester, what we are talking about is me and my friends, because you will not be around to see these benefits. And it's always very important whenever you hear a politician, somebody lobbying for some new project, to ask them, when you say that this is good for this area, what do you mean? Do you mean the people? Or do you mean the physical territory of the area? Or do you just mean the wealthy people who are going to get to stay, because this will just become their playground. Now, moving from this, we're going to call it a new segment, which is when I am going to scan the Boston Globe op-ed page and the Boston Herald op-ed page dry. I haven't looked at it yet, and see if there's anything that piques my interest. And then in the final segment, we're going to listen and watch to a forum held by the Progressive West Roxbury group for the at-large candidates. Now let's see what we get. Does the quick tab work? The quick tab works. All right. Boston Globe, opinion section. Ooh, Red Sox are winning. Also, if I get cut off, it's the rain and the thunder. It was not my fault for the tech stuff. Okay, Joan Venovici. She is great. Kim Janey, Dennis White, and the politics of race. That'd be interesting. Let's go. Abdallah Fahad, Republican attacks on higher education outside of democracy. Okay. Editorial, Boston mayors, including acting mayors, should have the power to fire police commissioners. Okay, that one's winning right now. Governor Baker is right. Public projects can't be union only. Ooh, all right, Scott Leahy. I've got to go with you. Let's see what he says. So what this is about is the Holyoke Soldiers Home, which we talked about, I think it's 77 veterans who died because of the political hire done by Charlie Baker and the complete lack of any supervision or accountability from Health and Human Services Secretary Sutters, which led to a complete oaf and imbecile, somebody who forgot when they fought in Iraq and they were so gung-ho that they ran out and they forgot their gun, which, as I said before, thank God, it probably saved some young child's life, was put in charge of this hospital, did the worst possible job he could do, even what looks to be a potential cover-up of when the deaths started to occur. And so now they're going to build a new construction. However, there's a part of it that has to do with union labor. And so let's see what it says. It should be no surprise then that the big public construction dollar is being designated for important new projects. Trade unions and their legislative allies are trying to limit who gets first bite at the apple. Actually make that who gets the only real bite at this or that juicy public sector poem. I can't pronounce that one. So part of this amendment that Charlie Baker may or may not try to strike down, he probably will, I believe, makes it so as part of the bidding process, whenever you have a public project, you have to have an open bidding process, prioritizes those developers that are going to use union labor, which we absolutely should be doing. Let's see what it says. The legislature has now slapped a PLA, Project Labor Agreement, on the $400 million in bonding for the new healthcare facility. Oh, and he did veto it. Okay, this is news to me. So Governor Baker did veto that PLA provision. And now, let's see, Scott tries to glorify the past of unions. Time was, PLAs were more upfront about their aim, limiting this project or that to union workers and union firms. This bond authorization, for example, professes to non-restrictiveness, saying that there should be no precondition to the award of a contract that a bidder has entered, provided, however, that the bidder should be willing to execute and comply with the project labor agreement for the project. So basically, again, what this would do and should do is making sure that development goes to people who will hire union contractors. They're safer. They pay much more in salaries. They pay much more in benefits for the people that live in this community. And there's also residency requirements, so that we're making sure that the people that actually work for these unions live in this area, and that there are representation requirements in terms of people of color and women in the workforce that they need to meet. So all of these are positives. And now I'm waiting to see Scott's argument to why is this a negative. Because the big dig was subject to a PLA, and so now he's trying to say that that was why it was so expensive. Which looking at the labor cost of the big dig was not why that project was so expensive. It was because you were trying to completely rewire the entire entrance and exit system of Boston and hired for-profit firms that some of them use union labor, but that absolutely etched out a massive profit in that development. And now it goes into about limiting competition, just kind of generic right-wing trash about why unions are bad. Okay, here's now trying to lean into a race argument. Most black construction workers are not in a trade union. That's mostly because most trade unions have been completely gutted and destroyed. Most black construction firms are not affiliated with the trade union, again, because we have so few unions, of course. So PLAs significantly limit the participation of black workers and firms, which, and this is from Samuel L. Gebrew, the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And so again, because there are some construction firms that have people of color leading them, and those firms do not want union labor because the point of every for-profit firm is to make money. And as I said before, unions cost more. The labor force costs more. They have better paying jobs with benefits. And so because there's, I guarantee you, a very small amount, if you looked at construction firms owned by people of color, the ones that do don't use this. And so they're then trying to make it, well, it's actually racist if you want to have unions involved. It's just a way of people with money and influence using that to gut unions. What else do we got? So this, if Baker did veto this, it goes back to the House and Senate, and they can add it back on if they want to. Okay, Scott, that was kind of a waste of my time, to be honest. Let me see if there's one for the Herald, and then we're going to switch over to the West Roxbury Forum. What do you got, Harold? Even though this is a good story, dozens of Massachusetts teachers are refusing to give the MCAS, which I think is great. They should all just walk out. But hold on, I want to look at your opinion section. Oh, there's some funny stuff about Donald Trump and Spygate, but I'm not going to talk about that. Biden declares war on single-family homeowners. All right, right off the bat, I got to do it. Let's go. Who is this by? Betsy McCaughey. All right. If you saved your money and bought a house in the suburbs, your investment and lifestyle are under attack. So, right off the bat, it's going into, again, feeding into the readership of the Boston Herald. Vast majority of people who subscribe to the Boston Herald, who are not me, own their own property. Already sets it up emotionally, saying that you saved your money, you did the right thing, you made an investment. Okay, now let's see. Oh, this is about single-family zoning. All right, this is easy. President Joe Biden is pushing to end single-family zoning. Now, how is he trying to do that before I explain why this is dumb? Is $213 billion he claims will increase affordable housing. He wants to put the federal government in charge of zoning and distribute apartment buildings throughout single-family home neighborhoods. Okay. Trying to figure out how far back I should go. But basically, single-family zoning is probably the most influential policy you can have about race segregation, income segregation, inequality. If you could get rid of or add one specific policy, which makes it if an area is, again, going to be racially segregated, have income inequality, have massive healthcare disparities, every quality of life metric you can name, the policy which impacts that is single-family zoning, which is, whenever you hear the word zoning, replace that in your head with rules about building development. The zoning, it just means the rules that are used for building, for construction, for development. So if you have a single-family zoning ordinance, what that means is you cannot build in this area unless it is for a single family. Like a house that I grew up in, where just the one house, the one family, little plot of land, next house, next family, little plot of land. Now the reason that zoning, that law, is so effective is that it costs a lot of money to have a single family house. And so if you are restricting it so the only people in the city or town, the only new development is going to be single family zoning, you are automatically cutting out the massive amount of poor people, which of course, because of a number of historical factors and present day factors we can get into probably for another time, disproportionately affect black people, disproportionately affect people of color. You were basically making up the income and the racial grouping of that city or town. And some towns get even crazier with it. Like it must be single family zoning with 3 acres of land. Again, just changing that requirement up or down is going to dictate who lives there and who can afford it. And the only way we can have any new construction, and this is particularly true in this area, is to get rid of the areas that have single family zoning, period. Because suburbs are the most wasteful, ineffective, publicly funded program that has ever existed in this country. Whenever people talk about public funding, when people talk about welfare, if you want to look at like what real public funding and welfare is, you want to go back in the 19th century and the railroads, for an argument, fine. In the 20th century, it's around the suburbs. The entire construction of the suburbs was built with public dollars. You would not be able to live out in the suburbs. There were no suburbs because people had to live where the jobs were. And it wasn't until a massive interstate highway project, which then built the roads, which allowed people to live outside of it and then commute to their workforce. Some of it actually was very much wrapped in anti-communist strategies of the 1920s. I think the most famous line is that there's no such thing as a communist who owns their own home. So as part of a anti-communist platform, as a part of breaking apart unions, which are highly condensed in urban areas, and to help sell vehicles, we had a massive interstate highway project and the development and construction of the concept of a suburb. Which again, if you want to see the most wasteful thing, you want to look at how much someone consumes. I live in a building, it's a triple decker, which houses 12 people in it for the same plot of land that maybe there's just a family of 4. Not even talking about once you get into like acre of space. Like I grew up on a 1 acre single family house that could probably fit, just using this construction, 100 people in that same area. So it's incredibly wasteful, incredibly subsidized, still to this day. If you own your own home, you benefit from a mortgage reduction tax, where the federal government gives you money, just sends you money every year when you file your taxes. I think I blanked on the name for a second, but you get a mortgage deduction. Renters don't get that. If you're a renter, the government isn't sending me thousands of dollars. It is the largest source of welfare we have is the construction of the suburbs. But all right, what else does this person get? Talking about the $213 billion for, again, increasing affordable housing. And I don't even know if this can come. I mean, I'm assuming how this would work is, if it is what this person says it is, which I don't know why I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, is that if to qualify for this funding, it cannot be in a single family zoning area. That's generally how they do these things. Biden's plan should be called hypocrisy housing. The backers are hypocrites. Biden himself owns a 4-acre lake home in upscale Greendale, Delaware. Which again, this is another very common trick, is to then say, oh, see, these people, they're going to be fine. They've escaped. They're not going to have the new, poorer residents who look different from us moving in. So this person's a hypocrite. Where, again, you're talking about policy. Bernie has 3 homes. Okay, and again, talking about how much money Vice President Kamala Harris has. Yep, talking about how much money the Obamas have. Yeah, this is just normal, very lazy. The politicians are putting, again, like saying that, oh, the politicians, they are going to live in these remote areas, but you, the Boston Herald reader, these poor people, these black people, these people of color, they're going to be living next to you. So these rich people who are trying to pass these policies being hypocrites. Which, you know what, there is something to say about that. That, Nancy Pelosi has $100 million. You think she's going to be impacted by zoning ordinances? But also, when you're talking about policy, and you want to figure out, well, why is it that all of the people who are in our government are millionaires and multimillionaires, that's a much larger question. But without any change in our zoning practice, you will never be able to fix almost every single issue that we deal with. It all comes down to land at the end of the day. So the policies affecting the land are the things that matter the most. That's a mistake. Local control is vital. Towns can take into accountability the availability of public transportation, school capacity, proximity to employment. Uncle Sam has no clue. Again, a very lazy, conservative local control over state control, unless there's, of course, issues like the military or the surveillance state. These people are fine with the federal government doing that. But that is another important part. That one of the reasons why towns fight so much for their single family zoning codes does have to do with schools specifically, because they know that if you have a zoning ordinance which makes it so that it's only rich people can afford to live there, well, one, they're going to get their taxes through property taxes, which is what is used to fund public education in this country. Most of our schools, 50% of which the budgets across the country is from local sources. But then also, that rich family, they're probably going to send their kid to private school. So it's like a double whammy. The town gets the extra money from the increase in property taxes, and the kid's not going there, so you have an extra seat in the classroom. The schools is a very, very big reason why a lot of families fight so hard for this. Mostly because most of the urban flight, especially in this area, which happened in the 1970s, once the Supreme Court said that suburbs don't have to worry about busing, and you saw, but cities have to be desegregated in the forced busing era, and you saw this massive exodus from the cities. There's a few other historical reasons for that, mostly black sharecroppers in the South from the 1960s heading north in a Great Migration, and then white people were living in the cities who all of a sudden were having what was called blockbusting, where some shady real estate developer would go to your house and saying, oh, hey, there's a bunch of black families are moving in. Your property value is going to get cut in half in a month. You should sell right now, and scaring them and everyone retreating. And then also to bring it back to the schools, because they didn't want their kids to go to school next to black kids and children of color. What else do you got? That's it. He should remove tariff on lumber. Advocates for abolishing zoning mock suburbanites for worrying about home values. But for most people, their home is their biggest investment and they've waited years to afford it. Which, to my point, should be this is why housing should not be an investment, should not be speculative. If everyone needs shelter to survive, and if you believe housing is a human right and a public good, it should be taken out of the market. But through capitalism, it's a reinforcing metric that you don't need to have to convince people to protect their own interests. You can make it your own interest is financial because you need this to survive. You need this to pass on to your family. Protect your property value. It's a very hard thing to fight against. It is. Looking down at the chat, and then we're going to go to the next segment. See, does this pop up? It does pop up. All right, let me answer some questions first that I've been seeing. You're welcome. The person said thank you. I mean, everyone gets kind of not say obsessed around the concept of 40B housing. We have a 40B trying to go on top of our water supplies. Are you willing to sink a well? I mean, let me just try to get you the most accurate definition of Massachusetts ordinance for Massachusetts. But basically that is, let's see, mass.gov, give us the best definition so I don't have to. Chapter 40B is a state statute which enables local zoning boards of appeals to approve affordable housing under flexible rules if at least 20 to 25% of units have long-term affordability restrictions. So as a binary, sorry, I'm looking down a little bit. I got to look up here. I'm going to figure out the camera situation. I promise TikTok. As a binary, do I support it versus not supporting it? Yes. Because what this is trying to do is square the circle of housing is not a human right in this country. It is purely speculative. The only people, we don't do public housing anymore in this country, and so the only type of development which is done is private. And so to make it more financially available to them, Chapter 40 allows it so that you can get around some zoning ordinances to build up complexes, and then we will kind of like trim that from your tab to make, and you get to make your money from the development, from cheaper, whatever the zoning things that you're getting around. And in return, you need to have some of the units be affordable. And now where people like me flip out is that term affordable and that term long term. Because what ends up happening with Chapter 40B is the units that are labeled affordable, and I'll get to that in a second, are maybe only for like 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years. And then they get to shut those down and it switches to market value. So of course it's a smart idea for the private developer. And the term affordable is not actually the type of affordable we need. I mean, it's one element of it, but our affordable units are based upon an area median income, not of the city of where it's in or the area that it's in, but of an entire 100-city region that extends even out of Massachusetts in some directions. The schools, for the person who asked that, I don't know if you're still with us, do not become obsessed about the school ratings. I worked in public education for 10 years. All the school ratings are bullshit. They're not based upon anything concrete or measurable. There are schools that have horrible school metrics that are fantastic and absolutely brilliant, some amazing teachers. There are some schools that have very high ratings that are horrible in for your child. Because the quality of a school is basically measured by standardized testing. And standardized testing is not a measurement of teacher performance. It's not a measurement of the quality or even intelligence of the children. The largest metric that you get through standardized testing is how wealthy are the parents in the neighborhood. And so and the most sure statistic or the biggest indicator of your child having a long, happy life is your income. And that doesn't mean that if you're watching this and you don't have a lot of money, you cannot provide a healthy, happy, loving home for your child, and that child goes on to do wonderful, incredible things. But I'm saying on a large, systematic level, policy level, that I try to interact with things on here because we're talking mostly about policy. The family's wealth is the biggest indicator. And so don't drive yourself crazy looking at school, what school rates what. It really doesn't matter. Care for your kid, read for your kid every night. Your child will do fine. But, all right, let's get to the last segment. And that is going to be listening in on a forum which happened, I think, yesterday for the progressives of West Roxbury and Roxbury at-large forum. And again, if you are watching on TikTok, I recommend you switch like Twitch or Facebook or YouTube because you'll be able to see the video. But let's see if I can magnify this. Okay. Oh, let me, boop. Wouldn't be a soft
If elected, what would your top 3 priorities be overall? First up is Carla Montero.
Thank you, Rachel. My first top priority is, well, they're not in any order, but housing, education, mental health, and substance use. We have to address the housing needs first before we can address any other issues that is going on in the city of Boston. Parents and students have to have housing stability, and we also need to invest in an equitable education for our students. There are so many issues within the mental health system, and as a clinician, I see a lot of the gaps in services that affect the people in our community daily, including substance use. I think that currently, all of those things, we need to address all of those things at the same time because they're all, in looking at them all through a multifaceted lens, because all of these things impact one another. And in order to take care of all of them, we need to start with housing because housing stability is the key point. As a social worker, I work with people who are experiencing homelessness constantly. And as somebody who has been on the brink of homelessness, I know the devastating impacts of that. And also as a Boston Public School student who has struggled academically and has experienced mental illness as a result of community violence. Those are some things that I want to make sure that we address mental health in schools and investing in the curriculum for our students. Thank you.
So that was Carla Monterio. I don't know much about her. I'm not going to make a judgment call on her. This is going to be a lot of fluff, to be honest, just already looking at how candidates answer these questions, but that's okay.
Next up is Domingos de Rosa.
I like when I hear that name. It makes me. But anyway, my three top priority boils down to humanity. What I've learned over the years talking to folks, everyone seems to have a different issue that they like to be addressed. So humanity needs to be brought back to the table where we're talking about what actually needs to be done for all individuals. We all, excuse me, are looking for services to provide for our family and ourselves. But education is 41% of the city's budget. Public safety is at 19% of the city budget. Economic opportunities, as you know, for the black and brown community is at 1.2% out of $2.2 billion here.
It was interesting that he said public safety and didn't label it as police.
Here in Boston, out of city contracts. We're not talking about private contracts, we're talking about city contracts. These are some of the issues that folks are talking about, along with health insurance, housing, and other issues.
I know the minute goes by fast. Erin Murphy.
So my top three priorities as a school teacher and a mom raising my kids here in the city is definitely education, academic success for all. Also healthy Boston. So with the education, I want to invest more in Madison Park and vocational high schools. As a kindergarten teacher for over 20 years and a special education teacher, I do know the value of a strong foundation.
Honestly, Erin is really bad on a lot of things. I don't need to actually listen to her response to this. I've heard good things about Kelly. I liked one of her answers I've heard before.
Over $50,000. Sorry.
Thank you. Three priorities. First of all, we need an equitable pandemic recovery. We need to make sure that everyone is able to be vaccinated, to be safe, to be able to have access to affordable housing, to resources, to finally come out of this crisis. Secondly, housing and the economy. We need to be bold as progressive leaders. It's not enough what we've been doing. We've been saying for years we're going to help with housing. Let's bring back rent control. Let's stabilize rents. Let's bring more pathways to home ownership in the city of Boston. I didn't even know what a mortgage was when I went to law school. And now that I have a home, I can tell you it is one of the best ways to help people out of poverty. And racial and gender justice. We must, in this moment as leaders, be taking on the cause of racial justice. We see what the senior leadership of the Boston Police has done. Child abuse, domestic abuse. We see racial violence. That's not something for our city, and we need someone who has experience to work on that.
Reggie Calamone.
All right, hold on. I got a comment. Really good from Kelly. I mean, if you mention rent control, you're basically going to get my vote. And as I said, a lot of this is fluff, but if you can name a concrete policy that someone says like that, that's good, and that's worth recognition. So good job, Kelly.
Thank you. My top three, education should be at the top, definitely. In the non-traditional sense, our kids are graduating high school right now. They cannot read properly. They cannot balance a checkbook. Basic financial literacy should be at the forefront of everyone's home.
And I've heard some bad things
Talking about
from James in the past,
someone
but
don't even have an account,
what do you got?
a banking account. I want to make sure that we change all that. I want to make sure that those that do not want to go to high school, that do not want to go to college, have a path after high school. That means re-energizing the vocational training program we have from Madison Park and other schools. I want to make sure that kids have a clear path if they want to become lawyers by exposing them to high-paid internships during the summer to make sure that they understand the law properly. I want to make sure that we eradicate the digital divide that is happening right now, to make sure that we have free internet access all throughout the city and not only in downtown Boston where people can afford it. We're talking to our seniors about telehealth. They don't even understand what that means.
And Ruth C. Lujan.
Thank you. My top three issues are housing, education, and economic opportunity, and racial justice. Those are the three buckets. First, housing. It is this city, we are in an affordability crisis. People are moving out, they can't afford to live here. Working class residents on whose backs this city is built, working class folks like my parents, participate in making this city what it is. They deserve to be able to buy a home here. They deserve to be able to live here. We need to, be thinking about housing holistically. Housing is a foundation. You create a stable house for a kid to live in. Educational outcomes increase. So housing, both on the rental front, let's look at IDP. Let's also make sure that we're targeting and changing AMI.
Was the timer functional this time? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's make sure that we are providing folks with enough rental housing, that we're using city land properly, and that we are using linkage to create affordable homeownership opportunities and working in partnership with land trusts to reimagine housing. Housing is a human right, equity and excellence in all of our schools, and economic opportunity via climate justice job.
I mean, identified housing, which is fantastic. She mentioned the IDP policy, which is right now, that is going to change, and everyone from the left to the right on the Boston City Council says that, oh yeah, we should change it. And I'm not confident they're going to hit a number which is anywhere close to adequate. Also, as I mentioned before, the affordable and what that classifies as, Boston now has the ability to change, at least for the IDP policy we do. There's some concern that because the area median income is set by HUD, that there are some limits to what they can change for that. But of course, all this is, I don't know, speculative. We'll see what they're actually willing to do.
Questions from Jayana next.
Alrighty. Okay, yes, alrighty.
Jayana
1 year ago
Green.
today, George Floyd was killed. As many have noted, we're in a moment in history that feels like a turning point, or at least could be a turning point. How do you define this moment, and what is your role in it? First step, Aaron Murphy.
I wish they asked concrete questions about, do we support defunding the police, yes or no? How much?
Thank you. So as your city councilor, I look forward to working with our partners in the community, including the AAPI action group that I work with to address
Aaron's horrible on the
inequality
police,
and
so this
to
will be
talk
funny.
about these hard conversations. There's racism in our city that we have to address. As a school teacher, I also know we need to look at our curriculum and make sure that we're teaching our children that there is so many wonderful advancements and contributions from all of our citizens across the country, city, and state. I look to leaders like Kevin Sibley in the city's Director of Returning Citizens, and to Judge Leslie Harris for guidance in programs such as the Center for Restorative Justice, so we can practice that art of listening, learning, and we have to learn and we have to listen. Change needs to happen, but I have to be in those neighborhoods and in all of these conversations so I can learn what is needed and what people want. Also, I do feel that we have to play a role in budgeting.
Yeah. So can you imagine being asked, if you're running for office, a policy question, being asked about, like, in this moment, 1 year after George Floyd was murdered, what changes do we need to make? And then your response to that is, I need to listen and learn more. And then rooting it to, we need to change the curriculum, as if the reason that Boston police officers grossly disproportionately stop and frisk policies, young black men, the reason that we have the brick system of surveillance of young black men in the city is because they were taught something wrong about race or racism. If those cops had a better education, if those cops had better training, they wouldn't have done that, without looking at any of the function of police in our society, the reason that they target poor people, the reason they target black people. Yeah, it's sad, very sad.
Outreach to legislative partners, the DA's office, and others, first responders, to make sure that people feel safe in their city.
Alrighty, thank you. Next up would be Carla Montero.
Hi, thank you. As a Black woman living in the community and as the mother of a Black son who attended school in Belmont, my son experienced a lot of racism, and I had to fight for him for educational purposes, for him to get an IEP. I had to fight for every single thing that my son received because
IEP is individual education
all of this
plan.
racial disparities at the school and also racial discrimination. And so, as a person of color, I understand the devastating effects of this racial climate. And this is not something that's new. This is something that we've been experiencing for years. And I think we need to do a better job with addressing it and also creating more equity for the people in our communities. every day as a mother, there's so many things that I fear. I fear losing my son to gun violence. I fear losing him to other community issues that go on. And we need to address the public safety and foster better relationships with our police departments and also with our communities and have everyone's voice at the table. Thank you.
Somebody asked a question in the chat. I'm going to answer. Will critical race theory be in the new school curriculum? I don't know, to be honest. And again, as a former educator, I can tell you that teachers have a lot of latitude, especially in certain units. And so if there are teachers that want to explore or teach critical race theory, they will. And if there are teachers that don't, I don't think they're going to be compelled to. So like what's actually in the curriculum, it all depends on the school, how much that is enforced, how much of oversight that is, if you're a new teacher versus a veteran. I mean, critical race theory is fine, and it's great. It's more than fine being public schools.
Thank you. Next up is Ruth Z. Louis-Jean.
Hi. So right before this forum, in prior forum,
Someone give me a policy. Come on.
March in Mattapan Square where we were commemorating the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd passing because of a foot on his neck. Right, the most inhumane of ways in which Black lives have been treated here in this country. We are in a moment where Black folks and our allies are standing up and saying enough is enough. When it comes to Black folks and Black and Latinx folks in this city, it is more than time for us to achieve educational equity, to achieve economic equity. So we are in a moment where residents like myself who were born and raised in this city are saying enough. It is time for our voices to be elevated and at the table. And that happens many ways. When I've testified before city council about my own experiences of racial discrimination in this city. And change happens through these increments from folks stepping up and using their voice to push for change. And that means money towards more community stabilization. There's a bloated police overtime budget. Let's use that in our community.
Thank you for addressing. Okay.
Alrighty, thank you. Next up is Reggie Coleman.
All right, I might mispronounce her name, and I apologize. Ruthie. Go with Ruth. I hope you will forgive me for that. At least identified a good concrete policy, which is looking at the police overtime budget, which I have major problems with them addressing that, but at least she said something, thank God, compared to the other ones, of how much money we're spending on police. Okay, so she hit that. There's a specific reason why you shouldn't focus on the overtime budget, because that is a goal. And what I mean by that is the police budget as set by the Boston City Council, that is not a firm number. The police get to go over it, they can go under it, they can do whatever they want with it. The Boston City Council and the mayor basically says $60 million in overtime. So please, can you try to keep it to 60, please? And guess what happened last year when Marty Walsh supposedly cut $12 million in the police overtime budget? Police went over. Police spent more money. The police budget ended up being more expensive last year than it was the year before it, after all of the marches, all of the protests, the violence done by police officers on innocent protesters in Boston, the massive uproar to defund the police, to reinvest in our communities. After all that, at the end of the day, the police got more money. And so targeting police overtime is a complete joke. Activists at the time called it out, knew that was going to happen. I called it out at the time, said that was going to happen, and it did. And you still have the same Boston City Council members. You still have candidates running for Boston City Council trying to do the same trick twice, trying to focus on the police overtime budget, where what you need to do, what you must do, is actually focus on the overall total budget. This is 100% about resources. Who gets the resources? If it goes to police are going to use it in the function that the police do. If it goes to housing, it's going to go to housing. If it goes to education, it goes to education. You need to limit the amount of funding going to the police, period. What do you got?
Thank you.
Oh, this should be good.
After we heard what happened, I sat my kids down and explaining to them what was happening. As a Black man that has an accent, that has been stereotyped, that has been racial profiled in the city that I love, I do understand that there's a better Boston for all of us, but we all have to sit at the table together. I remember taking my son to the square in JP for a Black Lives Matter rally when NPR interviewed him and they asked him, "Why are you here?" He was only 10 years old then. He said, I don't want to be next. I want to make sure that we understand that we are at a crossroad right now. George Floyd did not die in vain. When I'm looking at the news today from the four corners of the globe to see people getting together to know that he didn't die in vain. So I want to make sure that we continue this process, we continue talking about it, we continue the conversation, and we don't, when it stops trending, that we still remember that George Floyd did not die in vain.
Yeah.
Thank you.
More
Next up is
conversations
Kelly
and
Davis.
talking is not going to do anything.
Thank you.
All right, I'm
You
ending
know,
it with
I'm
Kelly.
running
What do you got, Kelly?
because seeing George Floyd not only say I can't breathe, but calling for his mother was a turning point for me as a mother. That is a horror. And we are paying the price. This country and the city is paying the price for the lack of reckoning and reconciliation that we have not done around race. What makes me different from the other people in this race is I actually run a national racial justice organization, Interaction Institute. And before that, as a lawyer, I trained court personnel, judges, cops, security officers on how to root out racism. I spend every day working with organizations about how you actually operationalize racial justice. I will work with every city department and every city councilor and every elected official to think about all the institutions of the city and how we have a clear pathway to eliminate racial inequities from the day-to-day work that we do. This is our moment. This is the moment of progressives to stand up, and I will stand up as a proud daughter of a Black mother and an Irish father. The time for bridge building and the time for justice is now.
That was a very disappointing
and
answer.
lastly, Domingos DeRosa.
Okay, we're going to hit Domingos. That was a very disappointing answer, Kelly.
Very upset as a Black man that things like this continue to happen centuries. This is not new to America. What I like to see is accountability from the city electeds, from the city of Boston, to make sure that we continue to grow relationships between the police and the civilians and the residents of Boston. There's a, school to prison pipeline that we continue to feed, that we need to dismantle. The gang database that needs to be dismantled. There's countless issues that we as a Black and brown Boston face every day. The wealth gap, the achievement gap, home ownership, and the list continues to grow. Having George Floyd life taking on national spotlight has given Black and brown communities, it's just a trigger. It's another trigger to the trauma that we've been suffering.
All righty, thank you.
All right.
We will be going on to the next question.
Into policy. People have been talking a lot about community policing, and I really need someone to explain to me what they mean by it, because that is kind of just one of those phrases, and I think that's kind of where he was going with talking between police and the community. But he mentioned getting rid of the criminal database, which the gang database, which is a completely BS system. That's the brick that I was referring to earlier, where people are given a point system. And if you have a family member that was associated with a gang, you get a couple points. If you were in the area around a shooting, you get a couple points. If you were the victim of a shooting or a victim of an attack, you get some points. If you're in a Facebook profile picture with somebody who is known to be affiliated with a gang, you get some points. And then depending on that, I thought I lost the internet for a second. But depending on that, you then just get surveilled and observed and harassed and stopped by the police. But all right, we're gonna end it there. I'm very curious why my live stream counter says 23 minutes, but we've been going for just under an hour. So thank you to the TikTok community, my buddy on Twitch, whoever else is watching me on Facebook, for sticking with the soft launches. We're going to be probably doing this for a couple weeks, the soft launches, maybe 2 weeks. But I got the first piece of artwork today, and I'm very excited about. And as always, like, subscribe, share, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Twitter. I am everywhere. Take care, have a good night, and I'll be talking to some of you tomorrow.